Part 1, Some Houses Eat What They're Built Upon. Chicago, 1895. The air was thick with coal smoke and new beginnings. The Great Fire had turned much of the city to ash less than 2 decades ago, and now streets once scorched were lined with brick and ambition. On the corner of Dunham and 14th, where the charred bones of a boarding school once stood, rose a strange red brick mansion that seemed too proud for its street. The townsfolk called it the Harrow Place, after the family that built it, Leonard and Beatrice Harrow, newly wealthy from the lumber business that thrived on rebuilding what the fire had destroyed. With them came their 3 children: Jonathan, aged 12, quiet and sharp-eyed; Clara, 10, prone to laughter and sudden silence; and little Elsie, barely 6, whose hands never stopped drawing. On the day they moved in, the neighbors watched from behind curtains. The house looked wrong. Its angles didn't settle right in the mind. Its roof seemed to tilt, even though it stood perfectly straight. The front steps felt longer walking up than down. Inside, the Harrows found the walls damp though the plaster was new, and the air stale though every window was open. Still, Leonard was proud. A house to outlast the century, he said. A place for the children to grow. But that first night, Beatrice woke to the sound of tapping. Soft, repeating, coming from behind the nursery wall. She thought it was rats. When Leonard struck the wall the next morning, dust fell in small clouds, but the sound stopped. For a time. By the third night, the tapping had changed, faint, rhythmic, almost deliberate, like fingers drumming wood. Elsie told her mother it was the wall children, and when Beatrice asked what she meant, the girl said, "They don't have rooms yet, but the house said it's making space." Beatrice laughed uneasily and tucked her in tighter. Yet the next morning, small smudges appeared on the nursery wall, 5 in a pattern like handprints, low to the floor. They were too small for any of the Harrow children. Leonard painted over them, muttering about damp and soot. But that night the tapping returned, louder. And when Jonathan leaned against the wall to listen, he swore he heard breathing. By the end of the week, all 3 children refused to sleep in their rooms. The air had changed, colder in corners, warm near the floors, as if the house itself exhaled through its walls. When Leonard brought in workers to check the foundations, they found the basement bricks wet with something thicker than water. The foreman, pale-faced, said the ground beneath had been poorly filled. Old soil, he called it. Soft and hungry. Beatrice asked what that meant, and he simply replied, "Some places remember being burned." That night, a storm rolled across the city, lightning flashing against the skyline. As thunder shook the glass, Elsie began to hum in her sleep, a strange lilting tune no one had taught her. It rose and fell like a lullaby half remembered. When Beatrice tried to wake her, the girl's eyes opened wide, pupils thin as needles, and she whispered, "They said it's almost ready." Beatrice slapped her cheek lightly, terrified, and Elsie blinked, confused, asking why her mother was crying. The next morning the tapping stopped. For the first time since they'd arrived, the house was silent. But the silence was heavy, thick enough to hear your own heart beat against it. The air smelled faintly of iron. When Beatrice walked the halls, she thought she heard faint laughter carried through the vents. Not giggling, something older, patient. That afternoon, Leonard discovered something peculiar. The house's blueprint rolled into a drawer, marked with rooms that didn't exist. A nursery, yes. A parlor, yes. But between them, drawn faintly in pencil, was a narrow room labeled holding chamber. He called it a mistake. Beatrice didn't argue, but that night she moved all 3 children into their room. She locked the door and kept a candle burning until dawn. The light flickered, casting moving shadows on the wall. Just before sunrise, Clara pointed and asked, "Mama, who's behind us?" Beatrice turned. There was no one. But on the wallpaper, faintly visible under the candlelight, new handprints had appeared, smeared as if pressed from inside the wall. In the morning they were gone. Leonard ordered the servants to scrub the entire house, repaint the nursery, and seal every vent. "It's a house," he said, "not a ghost." But even as he spoke, his reflection in the window seemed to move a second slower than his mouth. That evening, he drank until he could no longer hear the faint thudding that echoed behind the walls, and Beatrice prayed for the noise to stop. Outside, the city roared with progress. Trains, factories, voices. Yet in the heart of the house, the silence grew dense, pulsing like a heartbeat. And on the 12th night, Elsie's bed was found empty. The sheets undisturbed. No window open. No door unlatched. Only the faint smell of smoke, and the tapping, slow and steady, coming once again from behind the wall. Part 2. Not all lost children are taken. Some are given. For 3 days, the Harrow house stood under the quiet gaze of neighbors who whispered and crossed the street when they passed. The disappearance of little Elsie made its way through Chicago like smoke, curling through every conversation. A search party combed the alleys and the riverfront, but the city was already too loud to hear a single child's voice. The police came, asked questions, and left uneasy. There was no sign of intrusion, no footprints in the mud, no broken locks. Just a family hollowed out by something they couldn't name. Beatrice refused to leave the house, her eyes fixed on the nursery door. She swore she could still hear Elsie's humming at night, faint as if carried through the walls. Leonard tried to convince her it was grief, nothing more. But even he began to notice the small things. Toys rearranged. Candles burning lower than they should. Doors opening a few inches on their own. One morning, Clara found her sister's favorite doll sitting upright in the hallway, its porcelain face cracked and its tiny hands pressed flat against the wall, as if listening. When Beatrice threw it into the fire, the flames sputtered and hissed before roaring higher than they should, burning green for a moment. That night, the house grew colder, the wood groaning under invisible weight. Outside, Chicago bustled, trains screamed, streetcars rattled, and the laughter of other children echoed down the fog-choked streets. But inside, everything felt sealed, the air heavy, almost liquid. The walls sweated. The smell of iron and mold grew sharper. Beatrice began to see shapes in her peripheral vision, small figures darting just beyond the edge of the lamplight. Once, while washing her hands, she caught a reflection in the basin's water. Elsie's pale face staring up from below, her mouth moving silently. When she looked up, her own reflection was gone. By morning, another child in the neighborhood had vanished, a boy from 2 streets over. His mother swore he'd gone out to deliver bread and never came home. The police blamed thieves, runaways, the chaos of the growing city. But whispers began to spread among the factory women and street vendors. Something in the Harrow house called them. They said they'd seen children staring at it from the road, eyes blank, lips moving in unison like a prayer. Leonard dismissed it as nonsense, but he too began to unravel. One night, he was found standing in the parlor long after midnight, his hands pressed against the wallpaper, muttering softly, "It's breathing, can't you hear it?" Beatrice dragged him away, but when she turned, the wallpaper bulged slightly outward, like lungs exhaling. Days blurred. Jonathan stopped eating. He sat by the window most of the time, sketching strange shapes in his notebook, lines and circles that spiraled inward, forming what looked like doorways. He said they were maps, that the house had shown them to him in his sleep. When Beatrice asked where the maps led, he said, "Down." That night, she woke to the sound of running feet in the hallway. She called out, thinking it was Jonathan or Clara, but when she stepped into the corridor, it was empty. The sound came again, lighter, faster, like a child playing tag. It stopped at the end of the hall where the wallpaper was newly painted. Then came a giggle, muffled and close. The wall pulsed once like a heartbeat. Beatrice backed away, trembling. The next morning, she packed what she could and told Leonard they were leaving. He didn't respond. He sat at the dining table, staring at an old newspaper clipping laid before him. A headline from years ago, "Tragedy in Dunham Orphan Home, 23 children lost in basement fire." The date was 1871, the same year as the Great Fire. The Harrow house had been built on its ashes. "They're not gone," Leonard whispered. "They're still here. We built over their graves." Beatrice froze. She wanted to deny it, but deep down she knew, from the smell of soot that lingered even after rain, from the way the floorboards creaked like footsteps. That night she tried to leave. She gathered Jonathan and Clara, and they crept down the stairs. The front door loomed ahead, open just an inch, wind moaning softly beyond it. But as they approached, the hinges groaned and the door slammed shut on its own. The floor beneath them trembled. From the walls came a sound, faint at first, a murmur, then a chorus. Dozens of voices, whispering, laughing, humming. The air grew thick, pressing against their chests, and the lamps flickered out. In the darkness, something small brushed against Beatrice's ankle, soft like a child's hand. She screamed and stumbled back, clutching her children. Leonard rushed from the hall, swinging his lantern wildly. The light caught movement, small figures crawling along the wall, their bodies half-formed, skin gray and glistening like wet plaster. They scuttled upward, vanishing into cracks that hadn't been there before. The whispers rose to a shriek. And then silence, just the hiss of the gas lamp. The next morning, the family pretended nothing had happened. The servants quit without notice. No one in the neighborhood came near the house again. But when night fell and the city's hum faded, faint laughter drifted from behind the nursery walls. Beatrice sat awake, clutching the blanket where Elsie once slept, listening. The laughter was soft, familiar. And for the first time since her daughter vanished, she smiled through her tears. because deep inside, beneath the horror, she thought she heard her little girl whisper, "We're not alone anymore." Part 3, Every house remembers what was buried beneath it. By the time October's chill crept through Chicago's smoke-stained streets, the Harrow family had become ghosts in their own home. The curtains were never drawn open, the hearth was cold, and the mirrors were draped in black. Neighbors whispered that the family had gone mad, that the mother wandered the halls at night, humming lullabies to children who no longer existed, and that the father had begun digging in the cellar long after midnight. They weren't wrong. Leonard Harrow had started hearing voices through the floorboards, faint, pleading tones that grew louder each night, urging him to find the roots. At first he thought it was guilt or exhaustion, but when the voices began echoing through his dreams he gave in. He took a shovel and lantern to the basement and began to dig. The soil beneath the stone was damp and black, heavy with the smell of rot. Every strike of the shovel seemed to wake something deeper. Sometimes the lantern flickered as though the air itself recoiled. Beatrice begged him to stop, her voice breaking, but Leonard had already passed the point of reason. "They want to be found," he said, his hands trembling. "They've been waiting." For hours he dug, through the night and into dawn, until the shovel struck something solid. At first he thought it was stone, but when he cleared away the dirt, his stomach turned. It was bone. Dozens of small bones, tangled together like roots, stretching deep into the earth. Tiny ribs. Fragile skulls. The remains of children. Leonard fell to his knees, gasping as the lantern flame guttered out. In the darkness, something moved, a faint rustle like dry leaves shifting. Then came a sound he would never forget, the soft, wet laughter of children echoing from the pit. He stumbled back, eyes wide, but the ground beneath him pulsed once, like a heartbeat. When he scrambled for the stairs, the walls seemed to breathe around him. The house was alive. Upstairs, Beatrice felt the floor tremble and the air grow cold. She gathered Clara and Jonathan, clutching them close as the walls creaked like something immense turning in its sleep. Then came Leonard's scream, sharp, animal, desperate. She ran to the basement, lantern in hand. When she reached the bottom step, she froze. Leonard stood motionless in the center of the room, his eyes fixed on the pit. His mouth was moving, whispering words she couldn't understand, something rhythmic, almost reverent. Beatrice stepped closer, her light trembling across his face. His eyes were blank and his hands were covered in dirt and blood. "They're not dead," he murmured. "They're waiting for their mother." Beatrice dropped the lantern, backing away as the pit below began to shift. The earth heaved and from its depths rose a pale arm, then another, then many, small, thin, reaching upward. The laughter grew louder, echoing from every corner of the house. The lantern shattered, spilling fire across the floor. Flames licked the walls and the air filled with smoke and ash. Beatrice dragged Leonard away, but he fought her, screaming that they couldn't leave. "They're part of us," he cried. "The house won't let them go." The fire spread faster than it should have, racing along the beams as if feeding on something unseen. Jonathan and Clara coughed and cried, their faces streaked with soot. Beatrice kicked open the door, dragging them into the cold night. Behind them, the Harrow house roared with fire, its windows glowing like eyes. Neighbors rushed from their homes, watching in horror as the flames danced higher, but what terrified them most was the sound. Beneath the crackle of burning would came faint voices, children singing, laughing, whispering their names. Some swore they saw small shapes moving within the fire, unharmed, playing among the smoke. By dawn, nothing was left but blackened stone and ash. The Harrow family was gone. The city called it tragedy. The newspapers wrote of faulty gas lines and madness born of grief. But those who lived nearby told another story, that the house had burned from within, that the flames were drawn upward as if something beneath had exhaled. Weeks later, when the rubble cooled, city workers came to clear the ruins. Beneath the charred foundation, they found an underground passage sealed with bricks older than the house itself. Behind it lay remnants of a small structure, charred beams, rusted cribs, melted toys. On one wall, carved deep into the stone, were dozens of handprints no larger than a child's, pressed into the rock as if from inside. The site was left untouched. No one would build there again. The city grew around it, swallowing the memory under streets and smoke. But every few years, children vanished near that block, leaving no footprints, no screams, just silence. And when the wind blew through the alley at night, those who dared to listen swore they could hear them. Faint voices rising from beneath the pavement, whispering, "We're still hungry." Years later, an apartment complex would be built over that ground, bright, clean, modern. But those who lived there often complained of sleepless nights, of the sound of tiny feet running across the floor when no one was there, and of laughter that faded just as they woke. Maintenance crews reported black stains that reappeared no matter how often they painted over them. And in the basement, sometimes the lights would flicker and the air would turn cold, heavy with the smell of ash. Some stories are born from tragedy, others from guilt. But some, like the Harrow House, are born from something much older. Something that feeds. Something that remembers. Part 4, Some fires don't burn to destroy. They burn to remember. The ruins of the Harrow House stood like blackened bones against the gray Chicago sky, long after the embers had cooled. The city moved on quickly, it always did. Streets were rebuilt, soot was swept away, and new stories layered themselves over the ashes. But some memories refused burial. For months, the neighbors said the ground still smoked at night, faint wisps rising from cracks in the earth that no rain could fill. Dogs barked at the empty lot, children were warned not to play near it, and the air carried the faintest trace of something sickly sweet, like burnt sugar mixed with decay. But Leonard Harrow's name wasn't forgotten. His journals were found in the debris, half-burned but still legible, and what they contained was enough to make even seasoned police officers turn pale. Leonard had written of dreams that weren't dreams. Of children calling to him from beneath the foundation. Of a voice, a woman's, whispering promises of forgiveness if he would return the blood that was stolen. His last entry ended mid-sentence, the ink smeared as if he'd dropped the pen in panic. "They're coming up tonight. I can hear them in the walls." The city's archivists dismissed it as madness, but there were others who didn't. One of them was Reverend Samuel Dorn, a scholar of folklore and faith who had tracked similar stories from the East Coast. To him, Leonard's words weren't delusions, they were confession. He believed the Harrow home had been built over what once was an orphanage, the Black Hollow Refuge, a place that burned to the ground decades before, killing dozens of children. The city records had conveniently lost mention of it, but Dorn's research found enough fragments to piece together the truth. The Harrow house wasn't cursed. It was built on a grave that had never stopped breathing. In the fall of 1896, nearly a year after the fire, the city finally sent a crew to clear the remaining foundation. On the morning they began, one of the workers, a man named Ellis, unearthed something strange. A charred wooden toy horse, perfectly intact except for its eyes, which had been replaced by small stones. He laughed at it, tossed it aside, and went back to work. That afternoon he fell from the scaffolding and broke his neck. The rest of the crew refused to stay past sundown. By the third day the foreman quit, claiming the ground was breathing. The project was abandoned again, the lot fenced off and in time, forgotten. But Reverend Dorn didn't forget. He returned every few weeks, standing before the ruins, murmuring prayers into the cold air. Then one night in December he brought with him a lantern, a notebook and a small iron cross. Witnesses later said they saw him kneel at the center of the site and begin digging with his bare hands. Hours passed. Then just before dawn, neighbors were awakened by the sound of distant children singing. When police arrived at sunrise, the Reverend was gone. All that remained was his lantern, still burning, and a circle of soot around a hole that led nowhere. The city declared it vandalism. The church called it tragedy. But those who lived nearby whispered that the Reverend hadn't vanished. He'd been taken, claimed by the house even after its death. By spring, the lot sprouted wildflowers, pale and colorless, growing only at night. Stray cats avoided it. People crossing the street sometimes felt their vision blur for a moment, as if seeing something else. A flicker of walls still standing, a woman humming softly, or the shape of small hands pressed against invisible glass. The city paved over it in 1902, building the first of many new homes above its bones. And for a while, silence returned. Families moved in, laughed, celebrated births. The curse slept, but only slept. In 1910, one of those families, the Callahans, reported strange happenings. The youngest son, Peter, spoke of a friend under the floor, who played with him at night. At first, his parents dismissed it as imagination. Then the drawings began, crude sketches of children with hollow eyes and mouths filled with soot. One morning Peter was gone. No broken locks. No footprints. Just the faint smell of smoke lingering in his room. When police searched the cellar, they found handprints in the dust, small, blackened, and too many to count. The case was never solved. The Callahans moved away within a week, leaving everything behind. Over the decades, the house changed owners again and again. Some heard laughter in the vents, others saw flickering shadows in mirrors. One tenant, a nurse, claimed she saw children standing in her hallway reflected in the glass of a picture frame, but when she turned, the hall was empty. A few months later she moved out without notice, leaving her belongings locked inside. And every new tenant who tried to renovate the basement said the same thing. The ground was soft like freshly dug soil, no matter how many times it was cemented over. By the time the 1940s arrived, the city no longer remembered the harrows or the orphanage. But the ground did. And the whispers, the faint laughter carried by the wind, never stopped. Because some fires, no matter how many times they're buried, still burn beneath the ashes. And some homes, even when destroyed, still wait for the ones who built them. And in that patch of earth beneath Chicago, the Harrow house waited too, for the next family to come home. Part 5. Some bloodlines never end. They only learn to hide. A century later, the story of the Harrow house had become nothing more than a city myth, the kind of tale parents whispered to keep children from wandering too far at night. The site where it once stood was now just another block in South Chicago, home to a row of aging apartment buildings with peeling paint and broken mailboxes. No one remembered the fire, or the reverend, or the children who vanished beneath the floorboards. But the ground did. It always does. In the spring of 1998, a young single mother named Rachel Moore moved into apartment 3C with her 7-year-old son Liam. She was a nurse, overworked and quiet, just trying to start fresh after a difficult divorce. The rent was cheap, almost suspiciously so, but she couldn't afford to ask why. On their first night, Liam pointed to the floor and asked, "Mom, who lives under us?" Rachel smiled tiredly. "No one, honey. We're on the ground floor." Liam frowned, pressing his ear to the old hardwood. "Then why are they laughing?" She brushed it off as imagination, just the creaks of an old building. But later that night, she woke to the sound of small footsteps pacing in the hallway, light, quick, playful. She got up, checked the locks and found nothing. Only the faint smell of something burnt lingered in the air. Over the next few weeks, things grew stranger. Toys moved from one side of the room to another. The TV turned on by itself, always to static. Liam began talking to someone named Clara, saying she told him stories about a big house with no windows and a fire that never stopped burning. One night, Rachel caught him whispering into the vent, saying, "I'm sorry we took your room." She froze. "Who told you that?" she asked, but he wouldn't answer. He only smiled, not his own smile but something off, almost too calm. When she pressed her ear to the vent, she heard it too, faint laughter echoing from deep inside the walls. By summer, the apartment felt colder. The air was heavy, damp, and every night the same soft humming began, the same lullaby Beatrice Harrow once sang to her children, though Rachel had no way of knowing that. Liam's drawings changed too. They showed the building split in half with dark shapes crawling up from below. One morning, Rachel found one taped to the fridge, a crude outline of their apartment, with the words written in a shaky hand, "We remember." That night she decided they would leave. She packed what she could, but before she could wake Liam, the lights began to flicker. The hum turned into laughter, louder now, closer. And then, for the first time, Rachel heard a voice whisper her name from the floorboards. The wood beneath her feet rippled, warm to the touch, like something alive. Smoke curled up from the cracks, filling the air with the scent of ash and burnt sugar. She grabbed Liam, but when she looked down, his face wasn't his. His eyes were wide, black, unblinking. He smiled faintly. "We're home now, Mama." The lights burst. The apartment went dark. Neighbors would later say they heard a scream, a long, sharp cry that didn't sound entirely human, followed by the smell of fire. But no fire was ever found. When police entered the apartment, it was empty. No bodies. No blood. Just a single small handprint scorched into the wooden floor, and the faint outline of another beneath it, larger, like a mother's. After that night, apartment 3C was sealed. Tenants who moved in afterward never stayed long. Some said they heard voices in the vents, others swore the walls whispered their names. The building manager had the floor replaced twice, but the same scorch mark always returned, no matter how much he sanded it down. By the 2000s, most people had stopped mentioning it. Time buries all things, but the ground, it remembers. And sometimes, when the city grows quiet, when the trains stop running and the streetlights buzz out, you can still hear them, the faint laughter of children rising from beneath the concrete. Some nights it's just a whisper. Other nights it's something else entirely. In 2024, an urban explorer named Dylan Cross uploaded a video to his small YouTube channel titled, "The Lost Basement of Harrow Street." He had broken into the old building, camera in hand, documenting its decay. "It's all empty," he whispered to the camera, panning across peeling wallpaper and cracked mirrors. But then he reached the basement door, old, rusted, half-sealed with concrete. He laughed nervously, saying, This is it, the one they call the Harrow Lock. He broke through. The footage shook, the camera dropping to the floor. For a moment, the frame went black. Then a child's voice whispered close to the mic, "You shouldn't have come here." The video ended there. It was uploaded automatically through a cloud sync. Dylan was never seen again. The comment section of that video is still active, flooded with people claiming they hear things when they play it at night. Faint knocking sounds, breathing, even their own names whispered through headphones. Others say their screens flicker or their reflection moves just a second too late. The video now sits frozen at 666,000 views. And somewhere deep beneath Chicago, in the earth that once fed on the children of its own, the house still remembers. Its walls may be gone, its fires long cooled, but its hunger, its need, still breathes. Because a home built on the bones of the innocent never truly dies. It waits, it watches, and it listens for the next child who dares to call it by name.